wanted to do a quick little video on cash runway and working capital. When you're speaking to the board, they want to understand the cash burn as well. The board in particular will be very keen on you reducing your cash burn, but to make sure that the cash runway is as long as possible and that the business is using this cash resource as efficiently as possible. So as a finance leader, your job is to make sure that you understand the cash runway. It's always up to date. You know exactly when the business is going to run out of money or when the business is going to break even as a startup. And you also need to look at all the different strategies to extend this cash runway. So whether that is discussing with the board and the founder about the timing of the next fundraise, whether that be debt or equity, but what you can really take on board as a project owner really is maintaining, reviewing, assessing, and improving your working capital management as well as your cash conversion cycle. So that is what I'm going to go through today. My name's Alysha Randall. I'm a fractional CFO for Fast Growth Consulting, and I also train new and aspiring CFOs for startups or scale-ups with Financial Leadership Fundamentals course. And I also wrote a book with the same name, Financial Leadership Fundamentals, How to Become a CFO in a Startup or Scale-Up. So if that sounds like you, please click on subscribe. I do a video every Thursday, so you can check those out and work towards improving your skills and confidence as a finance leader, particularly if you're the #1 finance person in a startup or scale up for the first time, which has a lot of challenges, talking from lots of experience. So with most companies, as I mentioned, cash is really important. And your job is not just to think about the bigger things such as fundraising, but also how long can you make the cash that you have last. So managing the working capital is a really important strategy that essentially you have in your toolkit. And you want to be able to use that to bolster kind of the financial position. So just as a quick refresher, what is working capital? So essentially, this is just the difference between the organization's current assets, so what the business owns, and its current liabilities, so what does the business owe? And it represents the net resources available to finance the day-to-day operations. So a positive working capital indicates that the company can easily cover its short-term liabilities, whereas on the flip side, a negative value may let you know that there's going to be some liquidity issues. So you can calculate this quite easily by running a cash flow statement. The working capital tab total is a subtotal before you look at investment and financing transactions, as you can see here. So ideally, you want to extend the cash runway by reviewing your working capital. And there's two ways to do that. The first one is to quicken your inflows, and the second one is to delay your outflows. So some of these things are no-brainers. You've certainly heard them before, but it is always worthwhile, like your financial baseline, to constantly review your working capital and the efficiency of your cash conversion cycle so that there's always these little things that you can tinker and improve so that you can extend the runway as much as possible and that your working capital is as efficient as possible. To think about how do you quicken inflows? What are the things that you can do, or what are the things that you can review? So the first one is shortening your credit terms. So particularly if you have large enterprise customers, they are often pushing for 45, 60, sometimes even 90-day terms. Particularly if you've had these agreements in place for a while and you're proving yourself to be quite an essential supplier for this enterprise and you're very much embedded as part of their service, then you may want to consider negotiating those terms and improving them to say 30 days or even 15 days. So is it worthwhile reviewing those terms? It may also have been when you're a very early stage startup, your terms were quite long just because it was an attractive element for new customers because they were taking a chance on you. But once you've really got a slick service and you're becoming a better known brand, then you may want to consider having a chat with your sales team about reducing those terms and getting people to pay for your services a lot quicker. Feeding kind of off the back of that is looking about whether you can have upfront payments, particularly if it's subscription-based services. So whether that is paying for things on the 1st of the month rather than the 30th of the month is a perfect example. You may want to consider whether you can incentivize early payments. So that's offering discounts who pay for your services or goods as well much more earlier than what they had. So similar to upfront payments, you may want to say, look at if you pay for a 12-month subscriptions, for example, you only have to pay for 11 months if you pay for everything up front. You may have seen this quite often. It's very common in the SaaS business whereby companies will offer discounts if you pay for a longer term upfront. There's also a double benefit. Not only do you get a good cash conversion cycle or working capital as well, because you're paying for everything up front, or rather receiving everything up front, but you're also essentially locking in these customers. So the retention benefit is there as well. So if you have someone sign a 12-month agreement, but only having to pay for 11 months, get all that cash up front, and then they're in a contract for 12 months. They're less likely to churn during that period, and then you can negotiate again at the end of those 12 months. If you have accounts receivable and age receivable is a part of your business, then you may want to review your age receivables or your collections process. Ideally, you should be reviewing this quite regularly anyway. So what can you automate? How can you improve the process? Is there anything that you can do to encourage payment before the payment is due? And is it worthwhile having additional resources focusing on receivables? So it's worthwhile really considering whether that investment is worthwhile or not. And there are a lot of things that you can do from an automation and process improvement perspective. So definitely spend the time looking at your age receivables process and how you can improve it. Even just a tiny little bit every single month will ultimately help your working capital efficiency. And then finally, you may want to think about adopting digital payments methods. So if you think about this, sounds crazy, but you want it to be really easy for your customer to pay you. So I have certainly seen suppliers whereby you almost have to ask them how to pay you, or it's difficult to work it out. So make it as easy as possible. You want it to be a click of a button. You don't just want to be the numbers in an invoice, particularly if you have high volume. You want it to be as easy and simple as possible. So maybe spend the time looking at that from a sales process and consider, have we give our customers multiple opportunities to pay us, and have we made it as slick and as simple as possible? There is always iterations, there is always new methods of payment, so really spend the time looking at that flow. So then we want to do the flip side. We want to extend the runway by delaying the outgoings. So what are the things that you can do for that? So some ideas are negotiating with suppliers. So as much as you want to negotiate with your customers to get them paying you faster and having longer terms, you obviously want to do the flip side with the suppliers. So can you extend payment terms with your vendors? Can you negotiate potentially bulk discounts? Some suppliers may be up for slightly delayed payments, especially if you're a key customer. Or if you plan to upgrade requirements from a supplier, this may be a good opportunity to then offset better terms. So kind of a give and take perspective. That's always a good way of negotiating better terms. Sometimes for a supplier, higher revenue on a longer term may be a better alternative for them. If you're working with inventory, you're having overstocking essentially, and having too much inventory just ties up so much cash. So you want to really have a tiny amount of inventory as much as possible. Just-in-time inventory tracking is ideal. So anything that you can do so that you're not buying so much inventory up front before you sell it is very key. If you're working in that kind of industry, you just want to manage and have constant checkers, trackers, KPIs on your inventory levels, and it just needs to be a big part of your role. And then ideally you do want to automate payments, but I want to caveat this. So with a lot of tech SaaS subscriptions that no doubt all of your companies have, a lot of them don't invoice, a lot of them want to deduct payments automatically. And because with a lot of startups, there are a lot of good debit card payment options where you can have the virtual card. There's quite a bit of control there, and there's lots of companies that offer this, even if you can't get a credit card. But if you can get a credit card and the annual fees aren't that high, because obviously you can get credit cards for a hefty fee if you want to. But if you can get a credit card and the fee isn't too high, I would strongly encourage you to get one and use it for these upfront payments. And the reason why I say that is when you're paying via direct debit, you have zero payment term, and it's not great for your working capital. Whereas if you're using a credit card, because of the way credit cards work, and ideally you're paying for the balance every single statement, then you are getting between 30 and 45-day payment terms with these companies, even though you're doing the transaction immediately. So I would encourage you to look at credit cards as an alternative for debit cards. But again, I must stress that you need to make sure there's not a hefty annual fee, otherwise you're offsetting that. So that is another way of looking at it. So essentially, extending your cash runway, fundraising, revenue generation, they're generally the first things that you should be looking at. But as a side note, you should also be looking at all of these little things that you constantly tinker with, improve over time. This will significantly improve your cash conversion cycle and your working capital. It's really important, particularly when you're reviewing your business model, is as you're growing, if your cash conversion cycle is negative and your working capital is not very efficient and you're having to pay for a huge amount of stuff up front before you get the revenue benefit, you can only grow so fast because the cash needed in order to grow is quite restrictive. So you need to make sure that you can reverse that as much as possible so that you can grow as fast as the board and your investors want you to. So hopefully that's useful or something for you to think about. As I said, I do weekly videos for new and aspiring CFOs in the startup and scale up space. So check out all of the resources that we have below in the comments, and also click subscribe, and I'll see you in next week's video. Cheers.